And now, two guys who survived a complaint from the Better Business Bureau for bringing too much sexy back to survival, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, we open a lemonade stand, make $1 million, and tell you how we did it. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
And you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today's show is sponsored by Cat's Coffee. If you're looking for truly exceptional coffee to help you survive the morning or the next zombie apocalypse, you need to be drinking Cat's. They specialize in the finest coffee from sources that prioritize environmental responsibility and are fair trade certified. Their goal is to achieve perfection in every cup. Check them out at Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com, or click on their bright green banner on the site and make sure you're dealing with an official sponsor of the show. Again, that's Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com. Jonathan, I have some very exciting news.
Oh yeah? What's that?
I am no longer on Mexican radio.
That's really awesome, but what were you doing on Mexican radio?
Well, I actually wasn't on Mexican radio. The problem was apparently there is a Tejano station near the In the Rabbit Hole studio that is broadcasting incorrectly. I have a funny feeling I know where it's coming from exactly. And because of the way the boom for my mic is set up and how long the headphone cord is and all that magical, mystical stuff that I actually don't really understand that well. I'm sure there's an electrical engineer out there in the audience that really could, and please don't email me. I don't want to know about it. But I finally got these little things, and I think you actually know what the name of them are, and I never knew what they did. But they're these little things you put over the cord that somebody on the forum was nice enough to suggest. And I had to put I want to say, well, I'm counting it now. I had to put 3 on my flippin' headphone cord so that I was not listening to Tejano music while recording each episode.
I wonder if one really big one would have worked.
I don't know. Are they magnets? Do you know? I actually don't know what they are.
Actually, no. I think they're iron, but I don't know if they're magnets. I think they're the reverse of a magnet. Like, they're very anti-magnetic, but I don't really know how they work either.
Is there such a thing as an anti-magnet?
Somehow, if there isn't, there should be.
Oh, I would agree. And that's very weird, but I think that might be interesting. Maybe one day we'll do an entire show on trying to build anti-magnets.
Yes, it's going to go in our antimatter episode.
Huh. I think that might be an interesting idea. Power.
I might take that episode in a weird direction, though. Like, sometimes it matters and sometimes it anti-matters.
That's like the worst joke ever. I love it.
Right.
Okay, so now that we're done with the comedy routine that people are like, why? No, seriously, I actually was. For about the last year, there was a Tejano station I could hear in my headphones. And while you, the listener,
you were going to stop that as I could hear in my head.
Only sometimes when I drink tequila, which is
all right. Let's get on track.
It is Labor Day weekend, so I'm feeling a little crazy. You're feeling a little crazy, and in episode 27, we spoke on the topic of finding, keeping, and building a job. And since this episode is being recorded over Labor Day weekend, we decided to dedicate the whole show to building a business. Labor. And labor goes both ways.
Start this off with just a quick quote. Or not, it's not a quote, it's a statement. And I recently read it in, I think it was TechCrunch. But it basically said, what's the difference between a company founder and a masochist? And the answer at the end of the article was nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I just want to start off the show that way, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and you put in a pretty good point about that it is the backbone and liberty and all that. And I'll let you run with it since it was actually your note.
Oh, well, it's just that starting a business to me, or actually being part of business, any business, being a productive member of the economy is really, to me, the backbone of liberty. And the reason I say that is the only way you can provide true liberty is to provide financial independence. And if I can get financial independence, then I have true liberty. I can make decisions for myself. I can do things that I want to do. And one of the neatest things about growing a business and building a business is that you can also help others gain liberty and financial independence. So I think it's just the backbone of how all of it works. And by the way, you don't have to start a business for that, but you do want to be a productive part of a growing business. Anyone who's a productive part of a growing business can really take advantage of those financial benefits. Companies want to reward people who are productive. And if you're in one that's not, maybe it's time to go back and listen to our Finding a New Job episode. If you feel like you're being abused, you can either start a business or do that. But to me, it's just it is the heart of what it means to be that rugged individual, going out there and getting something done.
For people that are thinking, well, I don't really have an interest, building a business is not for me, because there are lots of people out there that just say, you know what, I want my 9-to-5 corporate job. I don't want to deal with any of the shenanigans that go on with building a business, or for whatever reason you have any number of reasons for having an aversion to building a business. But this episode, if you take the principles and apply them to your job, whether you have an interest in building a business or not, will actually make you much more successful.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the idea is if you're part of another business, you still want that business to succeed. I mean, otherwise you won't have that job for very long. I think people feel that pain more now than ever. And businesses, by the way, people who run those businesses, because businesses aren't things, they're run by people. And the people who run those businesses are always looking for productive people to help them. And if you're considered part of that group that's helping grow, then your odds of being laid off go down.
Yeah, and I think another way that I've come to look at it, and I think it really dawned on me in the last couple of weeks, if you treat your job and treat your bosses even just as if they were a client, you will have a boss that will trip all over themselves to make sure that you are happy in your job and that you continue to progress in stuff, both in level and in financial success within that company. And the quick synopsis was it was doing something, and I actually screwed something up at one of my day jobs, and it was going to cost about $1,000 to fix. And instead of going back to the boss and saying, we need more money for this, I just said, screw it. And I actually paid for it out of my own pocket and just got it done. And to a lot of people, that sounds insane. But think about it. If you're running a business and you have a customer, and that customer will potentially, we'll just use a nice round number, if that customer is going to spend $50,000 with you over the next year, and it is going to cost you $1,000 out of your own pocket to keep that customer, you'd do it. And you'd do it all day long because you're still making $49,000 on that customer. The same thing is true in a job. And I'm not saying that every last thing that you do, if it's not necessarily your fault or whatever, that you just start shelling out cash out of your pocket for no real good reason other than to look cool to your boss. But in some instances, gestures like that will truly endear you and gain a lot of notoriety. And I'm not saying that you make a big point out of it or deal with it if your boss, if something like that ever comes up. But most people would look at something like that and think, there is no way I'm coughing up that money to do that out of my own pocket. I know there was an instance, and I was doing something, and someone parked in a stupid place. And they ended up getting a ticket, or they got towed or something. Anyway, it ended up costing them like $500. Mm-hmm. The person that did it very clearly parked in a no parking zone, but then they turned around and expected the company to reimburse them for it. And the boss did it extremely begrudgingly, and I think really he felt sorry for the guy. But the truth was, that guy should have never asked for that. That guy should have said, yeah, that was I just pay him for it. Or if it, he damaged the boss's car or something, you pay for that. And I think most people look at it as they look to businesses often and their own jobs with their hand out. It's constantly about me, 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 me. Think about if you're in a personal relationship and you have somebody doing that to you, where they constantly have their hand out to you financially or emotionally or whatever else. you get really tired of that person really fast. But what if you're in a situation where that person is equally giving back to you value? You're much more apt to want to be around that person and be engaged in that person and return that energy back. So something that really kind of dawned on me recently, and I thought that's something I would share in the show, is treat your boss as if they were a client, not a boss. And you will, if you make that mental shift, you will see things very differently. And I think you'll find a lot more success, and you'll learn to empathize with your boss and what they maybe go through a lot more often.
I agree with that completely. And I think I'm going to add one thing to that, and I think it fits in nicely with the way you've kind of positioned the whole thing, which is if you're going to treat the people you work with and the deliverables you have as essentially deliverables for a customer, you should really start thinking of yourself as a brand or a product. And it's a good way to go through business, life, the whole bit. I mean, it is a great way to extend your career. There have been a lot of articles on it lately in the different employment journals. And I know Harvard Business Review actually did a whole segment on treating yourself as a brand. And they weren't just talking about starting your own business there. They were actually focused very much on treating yourself as a brand within a company. People who do the kinds of things Aaron was just talking about tend to earn a reputation within the company as being go-getters. They tend to earn reputations of being company people. And if that's the kind of thing that you want to be doing versus starting your own company, then that's really the type of reputation you want to be building. And you want to focus on building the best brand you can.
I would completely agree with that. And I think that, and that goes even outside of the company when you're dealing with customers. Mm-hmm. And I think from there, we can even start to get into business focuses and where businesses in some instances maybe go wrong, but really more about where businesses go right. And, a big one is getting funding. And I think, Jonathan, I'm going to definitely let you do that one because it's not something that not really something in my wheelhouse, but it's definitely something in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I've been through this a couple of times. The whole idea of getting funding. Now, this one's specifically focused on people who are building their own business or starting their own business of any kind. The joke is always when you go get funding, the first thing you do is you focus on, once you get past the initial self-funding of funding, kind of, is there a concept here? You go to the 3 Fs. And the 3 Fs are very simply friends, family, and fools. Friends and family do it because they love you. Okay. And the reason the 3rd F is fools is because the reality is people who invest in you, who don't know you, who aren't friends and family, who don't know your track record, and are doing it at that early a phase tend to be, and it's kind of joking, but they tend to be more on the fool's side. They're people who are willing to throw their money around a little bit. But if we focus on those 3 Fs of funding, that's really where you want to start. You can't go, I've got a great idea. And I'm sure many of you have read articles on the venture capital firms. You've heard about the billions of dollars they hand out or the tens of millions to some companies or, even smaller companies that get millions. The reality is the companies who end up getting that level of funding are much further along, usually at least a year or more into the company before they start seeing venture capital. So really the only way to fund the initial concept is either self-fund, which is a very difficult thing to do, and it normally forces you to burn up a lot of your safety net very quickly, or you focus on, like I said, the 3 Fs. And when you do that, building that brand, going forward and showing that you care about yourself, the company, the customer, building that initial business plan, those are things you're going to want to do. Write down what you plan to do. It doesn't have to be a complicated business plan, especially when it's friends and family, but really write down what you want to do and make sure you have something to take to them that's a little bit more tangible than, hey, Dad, I've got an idea. Because it's amazing how many people start that way, but the ones that are successful write it down and they document what that idea is and they can bring it to those people. And you want to get feedback. Those people you're going to for funding, they have more than just money. They usually have ideas of their own. They have beliefs, they have concepts, and sometimes they'll have experience. And rely on that experience. Show them the idea. Talk to them about it. Don't get all afraid that people are going to steal your idea, because if your idea is so easy to steal that they can just run with it, then most likely somebody at some point will do that anyway. It's just going to happen. So you have to be willing to share the idea a little bit, talk to people, And at the end of the day, if it's a good idea and people believe in you, and again, this goes back to you are the brand. Nobody is going to invest in your idea in all reality. They're going to invest in your ability to execute on that idea. And if they believe that you can execute, then you will get the money. And that's the beauty of it. If you can build that brand and build that confidence, then I put my faith in the fact that you can get the funds to get that company going.
Yeah, and I think to speak to, since I come from family business as far as self-funding, and then you can rely on banks. Personally, I don't, unless if you're trying to start something larger than say a few $1,000s that it would take you to do an initial upstart. And there are actually good businesses and good ways of doing business that you can do for $2,000. If you have some skills of your own, crossing a wide variety of business skills, you can do it. But in a lot of cases, people go to banks, and people begrudge banks. And it's funny, I think one of the most small business owners that I know will, if you want to get them on a rant, ask them what doing business with a bank is like. They hate it. And everybody loves to hate banks, but honestly, that is the business they're in. It's not necessarily pretty. It's not necessarily exciting, but it is what it is. And people rally against it and such. But there's definitely a time and a place for it. I don't know that it's something that I would ever do as an upstart, but it's certainly an option.
Yeah, it's tough as an upstart. And I'm actually going to throw one more thing out, just the idea that funding a business has gotten significantly less expensive these days than it was 15, 20 years ago. You can start a business from home. You can make yourself look huge. So one of the things you'll hear a lot from people who start businesses is cast a big shadow. You always want to make yourself look bigger than you are. And it is so easy to do that now. You could, even a professional web developer can have a website up for a reasonable amount of money. You can get email running through something like Google Apps for free for the first 10 users, and with your own domain name and everything else. And you can have calendaring apps and productivity apps. And there's so many free tools that are out there. And then even if you had something that required server space, you don't have to go start buying your own servers. There's enough areas that you can host them. And there's tools like Amazon Web Services. But there's so many tools now to make yourself look much bigger than you are. And I'm not just talking about tech companies. It doesn't matter who you are. Now, if you're going to go build a large manufacturing facility, that's tough to do. But you don't necessarily have to build your own to start. You can actually outsource small batch manufacturing these days to companies that are in China and India and Brazil. So there are great ways to really bootstrap a business if you're willing to do the research and put the hard work in up front to finding out how to do it.
Yeah, and I think I was watching something the other day, and it was an advertisement for Regis.com.
Mm-hmm.
And they do basically, I don't want to say fake, but it's kind of like fake office space, where it's essentially you get a very posh-sounding business address and a very ritzy building, but really it's a mailbox and a person there that's answering the telephones for several other people that are doing the same thing. And I think you maybe get some kind of like business lounge that you can go in and hang out in.
You also get timeshare offices.
Yeah.
Do timeshare offices and things like that. If that sounds good to you, that's great. The other thing that's great is a lot of cities these days have incubators and what they call business co-ops. And lots of people can't work from home very well. I find that I like to work from home sometimes and not other times. When I want to, now I have an office to go to, but when I didn't, there are great co-ops around in Austin that, and I know Houston's got them. And actually, my understanding is most cities have them now. And they're these great places where you can pay a membership fee. And depending on the fee, they're as low as $25 a month. And now, obviously, sky's the limit on how high they go. For $25 a month, you can get a lounge. You can kind of hang out with people, and it gives you a group atmosphere where there are other people starting businesses also. So you can ask questions, you can talk to people, you can go to meetings and figure out, hey, I've got this problem. Who else has had this problem before, and how did you solve it? Because believe it or not, pretty much every problem you can run into starting a business, someone else has had, and they've solved. So those kinds of co-ops are great ways to do low-cost office space. The Regis stuff is great, too. It's a little more expensive. It's more high-end. You get a receptionist. You get office timeshare. You get conference rooms. Actually, journalists during the conventions use them all the time to get some private office space. So But that co-op market, if you're in Houston, there's the Houston Technology Center. They do that type of co-oping. In Austin, there's probably 75 of them that I can think of off the top of my head. If you're in other parts of the country, I guarantee you they're in your city. Just look up shared office space or co-op office space or startup office space on Google, and you'll find it.
Speak to the point we were making earlier about how cheap it is. To start a website is so cheap now and so easy. If you have absolutely no idea what you're doing at all, and HTML means nothing to you other than you have some vague idea that it has something to do with the internet, then building your own website is not a brilliant idea. Even those ones where it's, oh no, we've got our WYSIWYG website designer where you can if you don't have graphic design experience, please don't build a website. Please don't. It's awful. I just, nothing is worse than going to a website that is actually designed and built really poorly. You can have one of those great Regis office spaces with a fancy, but if you've got a crappy looking website, it was like, who is this joker?
Right.
And that's not to say you have to break the bank on it either. It's not to say you can get a really decent website these days for like $500.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It is so inexpensive these days to do these things. And by the way, again, this is one of those things where $500, that's a reasonable amount to spend. You can spend thousands on a website too and get an even fancier one with more functionality. This kind of goes back to that whole, if you're a startup and you're looking at getting going, really think about what it means to bootstrap. And bootstrapping, by the way, does not mean cheap. What bootstrapping means is smart.
What are the necessities?
Yeah, what are the necessities? And spending your money wisely. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go cheap on everything, because in the end, cheap tends to bite you in the ass. But spending wise is a good idea.
I would completely agree with that. But to go back to the website stuff for a second, I've done a lot with web design and stuff over the years, and it is amazing to me how easy it is to do a lot of this stuff, and how, usually I really enjoy doing my own web design, but I was working on a project recently to launch a new shopping cart systems, and I still remember when shopping cart systems, there are still some out there that can get into the six figures. I have no idea why you would spend that much money on them, because honestly, they're not that great. But you can there are actually free, amazing shopping cart systems these days that are free, they're open source, and if you have some skill, you can put them in place yourself. And then you can go out and, there's a shopping cart I was working with this last week, and they have the very expensive versions that are about $20,000 a year, and actually that product is worth the money after looking at it. But they have an open source version that if you know what you're doing, you can put it in place pretty quickly and have a website up and running in about a day. The name of the shopping cart, if I didn't say it earlier, is Magento, and they have all these websites where people sell pre-made themes or skins, designs essentially, and you can buy them. And I think some of them were as cheap as $80, and some were as expensive as $300. I found it really easy to install, and you had something done. And for me personally, when I was working on one, and I almost become obsessive about it, but I know I can spend weeks farting around with a design for a website, and I looked there and was like, I don't have time to do all that. This $80 design is close enough to what I wanted that with 2 hours worth of tweaking, I can be done with this project, versus spending 3 weeks nonstop tweaking and farting and massaging and loving and feeling and touching on this stupid design that ultimately is unnecessary. So, right. And I think, and that speaks to the point about not only using your capital wisely, but using your time wisely. If there is something that you know how to do, but honestly, you treat it as if you were an artisan, and you really are going to spend a ridiculous amount of time on it, then it's often a wise choice to just buy something prepackaged or hire somebody off of Elance, which is a great website for finding people to do different things for you, to just be done and over with it so that you can get back to focusing on starting the business.
Right. And I think that's the beauty of it. So once you get funded, and whatever that funding might mean to you, it could be $5,000, it could be $50,000, it could be $1 million. And honestly, that is completely dependent on what that business is and what you want it to be. The next step really is to focus on, originally we had the next step as the product, but I kind of flip-flopped it a little bit, and I think the next step is to focus on the customer. So you've defined there's a problem out there. You're the business guy starting this business, and you've defined there is a problem. What is that problem? And you think you have a solution to that problem. Before you start really spending a lot of time working on what the product is, put yourself in the shoes of the customer. Whose problem is it you're solving? What's the best way to solve it for them? And, to some people, this is going to sound almost like semantics. Oh, yeah, I get it. You're thinking about the customer, but don't I need to think about the product? Yes, it is a little bit semantic, but I think the key here is if you keep focusing on your customer and delivering and what you're going to deliver to that customer, then it's going to really allow you to build the best product that you can. So many companies have tried to build non-customer focused products, and what they end up building is a whole bunch of things nobody wants.
Yeah, or you get somebody that they have a problem that they're solving, and they build a product that works for them. And there's 1,000,001 software applications out there that are like this, where for all intents and purposes, what the person built was actually quite brilliant, but they were so centered on what they felt was the appropriate way that it should be done or how it should work, and never once took into account what the customer wanted, and failed miserably. And by the same token, the person that spends all of their time focusing on the product and not focusing on another aspect of what I believe is the customer, which is letting them know about the product, then you have this amazing widget that sits in a closet. You have a hobby at that point. You don't have a business.
I believe that's a tough one. I mean, there really is that tough point of at what point do I go from building something to telling people that I have it? It is one of those things, because you don't want to tell people you have it too soon, because you don't want to build up that desire too quickly. You don't want to get the fire going and then have it go out before you've got something to deliver. But at the same time, you don't want to have something to deliver sitting there on a shelf and imagining, if I build it, they will come. That doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And to kind of go back to a point that you were making a little bit ago, one of the most brilliant things I ever heard was a guy that was selling, what was it? He was selling something, I think it was an information product. Information product being like videos that teach you how to do something, or an ebook or something like that. And he was obviously a marketing guy and said, I don't sell product. I sell a result. That's an important mindset to get into. If you ever want to go to one of the most miserable websites to use on the internet, go to a website that has anything to do with engineering or building materials. It is, here is the widget. It is this big. It is this long. It maybe they tell you what color it is. It is so dry and so uncomfortable that even somebody that is in that industry, it's miserable to use. There is a product. It is a really cool product for photography. And actually, you and I were just talking about it before the show, John, because I just bought one. And there's a thing in videography where it's the camera kind of slides, and its track that you actually put it in is actually called a slider. Well, there is a company that makes a really great slider. But if you actually go to the website, it is miserable to use because it is so obviously focused on engineer. So they're focused on the product. They're focused on telling you what the product is and what the product maybe even does, but they don't tell you what the product does for you, or for that matter, make it easy for me to use. And that goes back to focusing on the customer and making sure that the customer, and in their case, their customer is not an engineer. Their customer is a photographer looking for this product and trying to figure out what on earth it is they need to actually order. But it is about focusing on the result. And that is true when you're talking to people about your product. It's about the result. It is not about the product. The product, we've got this whiz-bang new thing and da-da-da-da-da, and it does X. One of the classic examples is an alarm clock. An alarm clock doesn't go off at 7 a.m. every morning. An alarm clock makes sure that you don't miss work and that you don't lose your job and that you're able to feed your family. Does the difference make sense there? It really is about what is the end result. And the alarm clock one may actually seem silly, but think through it for a second. That is what an alarm clock does for you. It keeps you fed. And if I was going to sell you an alarm clock, that's what I would tell you it would do. And that is how you should approach your customers and anyone, is to tell them what problem does it actually solve for them? Where does it hurt? And how can I make it better?
Yeah, it's not about all the features and everything else. It's about what it does for you.
Yeah. Features versus benefit. And features are interesting, but honestly, features can be complete crap. Look at DVD players, for instance. I look at DVD players, I'm like, I do not need all this crap. I just want to watch a movie.
Are you saying you didn't want that multi-angle view?
Only for porn. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's all it was ever used for. But moving along, I think in a lot of ways, when we talk about products, the customer can be the product. So you can take, and this is kind of blurring the lines between marketing and product and customer, but you can take Zappos. And Zappos is a really great company, and there's books on it and everything. What made Zappos special? They sold shoes. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but what they did was they really focused on the customer. And their product was not shoes. Their product was an amazing experience, an amazing hassle-free experience for the customer that ultimately made their customer's life and day better because they could buy shoes easily.
That customer service notion is amazing how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting anybody do this, but you can sell a really crappy product. And if you can service it well, meaning you can provide the customer with a good feeling about it, then people will buy it. Really interesting example of that is a large vendor of computer hardware sold a product that was premature. At the end of the day, the company that did well was the one that went to market first with it, and it had all kinds of problems. Customers would have to return these machines. Well, the way the company handled it is they said, we are so sorry that you got a product that was defective, and we will make sure that by tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., we will business overnight you a brand new one. And that company got that for that year, the best customer service results out of any of the major tech firms. They sold a product knowingly that was broken, and they still got the best customer service ratings out of all the companies. It just goes to show you that it's all about how you take care of your customer and how you make them feel through the process.
I've dealt with companies that have amazing products, but you call in and try to deal with their customer service for any reason, and they treat you like it's an imposition that you would be calling them for any reason whatsoever. In some cases, I've actually gone with an inferior product because I've hated the customer service so much. And I've said, this company really doesn't give a crap about me. They give a crap about my dollar. And I'm not even really sure they care about the product, even though they're making the best product out there. But I don't want to give them my money. And that's a strong message, especially if you've been listening to the show for a long time. You'll know I'm somebody that is obsessive about buying the absolute best that I can, because I really only want to buy it once. I don't want to keep dealing with it over and over and over. And especially when we're talking about survival stuff. I mean, if your life's going to depend on it, you should be willing to spend some money on it and buy the best you can. But that really does speak to it. If somebody gives me a really, for lack of a better word, if somebody gives me truly shitty customer service, I will never do business with them ever again. And I tell you what's worse is if you're somebody that talks a lot like me, I will make sure that everyone I know that has an interest in, or could ever possibly have an interest in that product will now know what I think of that product or that company. And I think I've even done it once on the website before from a company that just really kind of screwed me around on something. To slide into the next topic, and we've danced on it a bit, probably the most important part of marketing, which is to understand what it is you're actually selling, but to understand that you are selling and marketing. And a lot of business owners really fall short on this, or they don't realize the importance. And I think we even talked about a little bit that if you can have the most amazing product in the world, but if no one knows about it and nobody understands what it does, more importantly, what it's going to do for them, then you've just got a hobby because no one's going to buy it. Or, maybe your cousin buys it because they're into the same weird crap you're into, but that's it. You can have the most amazing customer experience ever, and that is a form of marketing. But if you don't have customers coming in your door, you don't have customers to make happy and to know that you have an amazing experience. And marketing is not advertising, and advertising is really a subset of marketing. And marketing is this whole kind of nebulous concept that I think we could spend an entire show on, and that's not really the purpose of this episode or even the website, so probably won't go into it, but there are a lot of really great websites and information out there on marketing. And I think any business owner that doesn't spend some real time studying and understanding what direct marketing is wrong. And that's not something I usually say. I usually don't tell people you're wrong. But if you don't, you're wrong. Because understanding direct marketing, and probably the worst example of that is those really terrible letters you get in the mail that you're just like, oh, God, and it's that long sales letter. You know what? They send them out because they work, but there is a way to do them in a genuine way. If your product genuinely does solve the problem you say it does, then that is a worthwhile thing to say. But, what is the one I love to beat up on? Solutions from Science has a solar generator, they call it. And they tell you, you'll never suffer through brownouts, blackouts, or whatever else. That's their commercial. Pisses me off to no end every time I see that commercial, because I know what they're saying, but they're the kind of guys that give marketing and marketers and marketeers a bad name, because they've taken the result too far and they've said something that really is a stretch, because the only thing that's going to do to help you not suffer through is maybe your cell phone keeps charged. But the implication is that somehow that's going to keep all of the lights on in your house, in your refrigerator and everything else, and that's completely untrue. So there is a fine line in a way of understanding the ethics of what you're doing and what you're saying and how far you take what the result is. But I think it is so crucial, because so many business owners are a product guy or woman. There's somebody that had a really great idea for a really cool widget that really did solve some problem, and they know how to make it, but they don't know how to get it out there in front of people and make other people understand why it is such an amazing freaking product.
And actually, on that note, there's a good philosophy around that, which is if you are an engineer and you start a company and you begin building that product, there is a certain point at which it may make sense to bring in what's sometimes referred to as a co-founder. Now, they didn't found the company, and sometimes you have to put away a little bit of ego. But the idea is a co-founder has whatever your expertise is, they have that opposite side. If you're an engineer, they're a business person. If you're the business person who's come up with you see the problem, you kind of have an idea of how to solve it, and you need an engineer, well, then bring in an engineer. But that idea of the co-founder really allows you to broaden the company. And I think that's something I'm going to throw in right now, too, which is as you build all these things, think in terms of where your skills are, but also think in terms of very clearly where are your weaknesses. And Aaron mentioned a great tool earlier, Elance. Elance is a fantastic tool to help you find people to plug holes where you have weaknesses. You might be able to find web developers or graphics people or writers. The other place to fill holes is obviously a site called LinkedIn. I've mentioned it before. If you've got a network of people you've worked with in the past, LinkedIn's a great place to do searches and see who has what skills. But understand where your weaknesses are, because if you have them, now's the time when they're going to become not just weaknesses, but real potentially critical flaws in how you do things.
I would completely agree with that. And even to give an example, we are working on an In the Rabbit Hole, which we've been asked for like 1,000,001 times now, and so we're finally doing it, like an In the Rabbit Hole ebook that it basically goes through what are the most important things, that if we could only give you specific topics that we wanted you to walk away with, to understand about, and that's what's going into the ebook. Basically, it was consisted of about 14 of the episodes. Well, that's almost 14 hours worth of audio. And while I consider myself a decent enough writer, I really didn't want to sit through 14 hours of listening to myself and Jonathan of things I've already said and transcribing and then editing it into a book. So put out an ad on Elance, spent a couple $100, and I hired a young girl out of Phoenix to first transcribe them and then do some editing. And then she's going to give it back to me, and then I'm going to put my final touches on it. And in some ways, people that are like, no, I'm a writer, then to that, they may not like that idea. And if your product is writing, then okay, that makes sense. But for me, that's not my product. It's information I've already put out there. I don't want to redo it again. So I've turned it over to somebody else and created a growth experience for somebody else and given them money and created kind of a job for them. And that's 14 hours of just sitting there listening to things I've already done. I don't have to spend now. That is a great example of using Elance. And that goes back to, it's something I could have done myself, but my time was much better spent somewhere else. And in some cases, you can figure out what is your hourly rate? What is your time worth? What do you make? And you can apply that to something and say, is this activity actually going to make me that much money? Or am I at least going to break even? And sometimes you have to say no and say, you know what, even though I enjoy doing it, I'm going to give it to somebody else to do because my time is better spent over here focusing on this thing. And I think, and that kind of leads us into something that most people don't think about, and certainly is really, I see a lot of small business owners do not spend enough time with this topic, which is automation and operations. There's a great quote that I'm about to completely screw up, and so I'm just going to paraphrase it, and I believe it was from Abraham Lincoln. I think it was something along the lines of, if I have 4 hours to chop down a tree, I'd rather spend 3 hours sharpening and 1 hour cutting down the tree than 3 hours chopping at the tree and 1 hour sharpening. Automation can be very tedious to set up, and worrying about operations and how things flow and how things work can be very tedious and feel boring and time consuming in the beginning. But it is that same concept of spend 3 hours sharpening your axe and 1 hour chopping at the tree. You'll be very grateful at the end of those 4 hours that you did that. The same thing is true with automation. Anytime I work on any kind of business venture or anything, I'm constantly looking, can I automate this? And it sounds almost a little cold-hearted because that ultimately means you're going to take a human being out of it, and that could mean an employee. That could also mean you. But everything you automate, if a machine can do it and the person that built the machine the first time did it correctly, then the machine will do it without error almost every single time. Human being, we have bad days, we have fights with our spouses, we have our dog looked at us funny this morning, and whatever, we blow things off.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to that, though. Do not automate process you don't understand or don't yet know. Don't jump into something, and this is, I've seen this happen so many times. Somebody's like, look at this. This is simple. I can just automate it. And you automate it to the way you think it would work. Well, until you've done it a couple of times in an unautomated fashion, you don't know how it would work. You may think you do, but there's a good chance you don't. And Aaron knows this very well because he's seen almost every process he's ever automated. He's seen it done millions of times. So he knows them all really well. And that's why it works so well to automate them. But if you are a business owner and new to business and starting a new venture, my suggestion is go through it a few times. And then I completely agree. You want to figure out where it is you can automate, where it is you can save time, and where it is you can save a little bit of money. But you can't really figure out those things until you do it.
I would completely agree with that. And there are, I think, one that in small businesses, you always end up writing purchase orders because as a small business, you're almost always ordering in materials to make a product or to do something. And unless you're one of the Lowe's or Home Depots of the world that can hire an entire staff to worry about and massage and watch an automated purchase order system, that is not something I would ever do. And actually, I think one of the systems we have in my family, systems in place we have in my family's business, actually does have that capability. And I have automated half of it, and the actual process of sending it to the manufacturer, that does not happen. That ability is there, but I do not let that happen because it's very easy for somebody to go in and screw something up completely on accident. And the next thing I know, I've got 3 18-wheelers showing up full of rubber dog doo-doo. And, well, I don't need 3 trailers of rubber dog doo-doo. I may laugh for a few seconds until I realize what that mistake is going to cost me. But that is an example of also where automation can go wrong, and you do have to actually be careful with it.
You said something really, really good in there that I'm not even sure you picked up on that you said. But
3 trailers of rubber dog doo-doo?
It was the idea that you have process. And so as you define process, try out a few processes. And it's not until you have a process that works that you can automate. And then just like you did, it's not until you see that process can you figure out how much of it can I automate versus how much should I just not automate yet.
Yeah.
But it's all about developing process first. So when you're looking at your operations, understand what is the process and then what part of that process can I offload to an automation.
And besides just saving time and everything else, a lot of what automation does save you money. And there's the old adage, what is it? A penny saved is a penny earned. It's an old cliche, but it is so true. That is, I know when I was going through my family's business, looking for ways, especially as the recession was hitting, it was like, okay, what a lot of the people at the table were saying, how can we bring more business in? And I was looking at it as, how can we reduce our costs? Because if we can reduce our costs, we can maintain with the same level of business. And even if we can streamline things enough, we can be doing even better than we were before with the exact same amount of customers, or even a few less customers. And it is amazing, especially older companies that have been around for a long time, that have a lot of really old processes and things that really I wouldn't even call processes. They're just kind of, this is how we do it because this is how we've always done it. Yeah, there's actually a lot of money tied up in that. I know there was, you'd often be amazed how much waste there are, especially in older companies that are bad about going back and revisiting their processes and their automation, or even if they even have any automation. And I think the next thing we should really get on to is some misconceptions and lay out some hard truths about being in business for yourself. And the thing that I hear all the time that kind of makes me crazy, and it's hysterical. I've heard my father you want to watch him get into a rant besides talking about banks. This is kind of the next one, is that people will say, oh, I want to work for myself. I don't want to answer to anybody. I have some very bad news for you. If that is your reasoning for going into business, that is your sole reason for going into business, you are going to be sadly mistaken. Because while you don't have the boss standing over you or the three bosses coming by your desk asking you for, the TPS report or whatever, now you have the government that you never really had to deal with before breathing down your neck. And that is, you've got regulations, you've got taxes, you've got permits. Oh, and permits, so much fun, because you've got city, state, and federal, and the three act as though they've never met before. I can give you an example. I was working on something last week, and I had to go get federal tax ID, and I had to get state tax ID. You'd think it would actually make sense if the state used the federal tax ID. Nope. Totally separate process. Got to get your own number, even though it would completely streamline things on their end, and for essentially the customer here, the business trying to get a number, as if it just used one number. No, we got to have a separate one. And what are some of the other funny things that have happened? Oh, yes. As a business, you obviously pay taxes, and part of those taxes go into trash collection. Guess what? A lot of businesses don't actually get to use trash collection services. They have to hire commercial tax collection services. And then there's the fun and games of, oh, well, now you're going to need a permit for that dumpster. And then on top of that, as recently happened to my family's businesses, oh, you're going to need to put a screen around that. I'm in an industrial park. There's some reason I need to beautify this?
I don't like it.
Now, it's like you're in a warehouse district. And they're like, oh, no, we need to beautify the area. For what? So, and these are the kind of shenanigans you have to deal with. And you have no choice because, yeah, guess what? The ultimate end result of not following along with any of these things is that people with guns show up and tell you you're out of business and you're now going to jail. And at worst case scenario. Best case scenario, people with guns show up and don't take you to jail. They just, look mean until you give them money. Now the government is your boss. And you do have to answer the government. Now, if you've borrowed money from a bank, they are now your boss. Your clients are your boss. Because they really do. If you want to keep them as clients and you'd like to keep cash flow coming in, they're telling you what to do. And in some cases, when to do it.
And it's a lot harder to just go find another job.
Yeah. The only way that I can think of that you will ever work for yourself is if you move to a deserted island. At that point, everything you do, every choice you make you are the sole beneficiary of it. There is no other instances where you're not. And I think the next thing to understand is employees. And I hear people say, oh, well, no, I'm going to do a sole proprietorship and I'm not going to have any employees. Good luck with that. Because at some point, if you have any interest in growing beyond the bare minimums, you will have employees. And yes, when you have your spouse work for you, they are now an employee. Employees are a funny thing, and this is in some ways going to sound overly negative, but I need to paint a picture for you about employees. And if you are an employee, this is something you want to understand about yourself too, which is, and I love, whenever anybody asks me about this, I always use the traffic analogy, which is, if you're in traffic right now, carefully, don't get too distracted, but look around you for a second. If you're not in traffic right now, think about the last time you were in traffic. Think about the guy that just cut you off. Think about the guy that slowed down while crossing the street as you were trying to get through an intersection. You know the one. Think about the person next to you picking their nose in traffic. Or the woman, or the man, depending on, exactly where you live, putting on makeup while they drive. The person that is on the phone having a fight with their significant other while they drive. And finally, the person that just let you over, the nice person. All of these people now work for you. You have to manage them, and they will do this stuff at work, too. I use the traffic analogy because so many of us actually get irritated in traffic at all these things that all these other people are doing to us. And those people now do that at work. I tell you that from about 12 years of having employees, and I've had as many as 30 employees that worked directly under me and as few as 2. But that is the reality of having employees. You have to, they're having a bad day, it is now your problem. They showed up late for work. Now you truly understand why that is annoying. Anything. They get jury duty. They don't actually have jury duty. Whatever. A lot of business owners would joke that it's like herding cats, and it is. And now that's not to say that I don't really care about my employees or that I just think they irritate the living crap out of me. Eventually you realize that is just human beings, and that when you worked for somebody else, you did the exact same crap. And often, if you are a small business owner, often when you look back at things, you'll want to call up your last boss and apologize to them because you'll realize just what a headache employees can actually be. And so that's something to watch out for. And I think the other thing to understand about being a small business owner is now suddenly you are a money tree. A lot of times customers will not actually respect how much time and energy and money you have into a product. And the same thing with employees. Employees, they see a business running that you've spent years establishing, and they'll often look at it as if, oh, well, you're just getting rich off this place, and really you're scraping to get by. You're just trying to keep the lights on. Those are the darker sides of things. There are certainly the lighter sides of things, but those are just the things to really be aware of.
I totally agree with all that, but, you paint a really terrible picture there, Matt. There are also some fantastic positives. And actually, I joke around. I mean, I think the picture you painted is pretty realistic. But on the other side of that, I think people need to know. For instance, you do have a family business. I've been part of more than one startup. And the benefit. The biggest one is that you're working truly for your own benefit. And I don't mean that in a silly way or that you work for yourself kind of way, like Aaron said before. I think there's always bosses and things like that. But to this, when you put in the extra work, you know exactly what that work is for, and you understand how it's going to impact you later. You also, you dictate the road you're taking. And that is a wonderful thing. I mean, the customers can dictate product changes. The customers might dictate your hours. Your employees will probably dictate some of the things you need to do. Regulation will dictate other things. But you determine how much or how little you want to grow this little venture of yours or this idea of yours. You get to determine whether you want to do it in, the city you live in now, or whether you want to pick up and move your family. When you decide on who you need to help you, you get to pick those people. It's not like somebody's going to push them on you. You really get to really think about it and do that. And, one of the things that personally is so great for me is I like to think that I'm doing my part to help others grow the American dream. And you can do that too. And the reason I say that, I believe that when you start a business, like I said earlier, you're doing this fundamental thing. You're helping yourself with liberty, and you're potentially helping others. As you create this business and you create jobs, you're helping other people become more and more financially independent. And I just think that's the greatest gift you can give to yourself, to a community, to whoever it might be, is that idea that one day they too can be financially independent. And that's a great thing. I mean, assuming you can get your business there. And like Aaron said, lots of businesses fail. There's a lot of hurdles in your way. But if you can do it, it's just so wonderful.
It really is. And there is the more troublesome parts of it. But as you're saying, yeah, there are some huge positives. And the idea of, the classic idea of, well, I'm going to go fishing once a week. That is certainly possible. I say that because I do actually go fishing about once a week now. And I talked in a previous episode about why I do it. I do it to go hang out with my dad. And I realized I didn't have the time left to him to tell him I didn't have time to do that. But I am actually now in a position, as he is too, that we're able to say, I'm going to take off on Wednesdays and go fishing because no one else is out on the lake, as opposed to, well, this weekend I'm going to go fishing. It is, you do have that luxury because you don't have the stereotypical boss asking for a TPS report. You do have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to put this work off till 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm going to go fishing now. The other nice thing about doing that work at 3 o'clock in the morning is when you do that work for WM Megacorp, just to make up a name, and you're there at 3 o'clock in the morning working on something, it sucks. It sucks a whole lot less when you know you're doing it for yourself and for your own family and everything. Somehow it's okay that you're up till 3 a.m. working on something. I'm not going to say it's not amazing, no. But it's definitely okay, and it's a lot better than if you're doing it for some nameless fate or some faceless kind of giant entity, or even just somebody else's small business. It's a lot better when you know it's for you. And I think something that has become kind of a common thread these days, and to go back from what we were saying about the customers, is you do actually get to fire customers, which is kind of an amazing thing. If you have a customer that truly is just an ass, you can say, piss off. I don't want to do business with you. Now, that's not to say you can go do that to every single customer. I mean, you do at some point actually have to be a reasonable human being that is not socially so awkward that, or just so full of anger and hatred at the rest of humanity that you cannot actually cope with other human beings. You do definitely still have to be able to do that.
Don't alienate your customers, but it gives you flexibility, and that's the beauty of it. I mean, we talked before about the whole idea of you're not your own boss. Well, nobody's really completely their own boss, like Aaron said, but you have flexibility when you start your own business or when you part of something that's growing like I am now. I've got an appointment next week in Houston for personal reasons, and I'll be able to jump into town. Hopefully I'm there long enough to either grab a bite with Aaron or something like that. But the beauty of it is I can do that, and I don't have to take a real vacation day or anything. I can say, hey, this is something I need to get done. Now, on the flip side of that, when they ask me to stay there till 3 a.m., I know what I'm working for, and I'll do it, but it is still staying there till 3 a.m.
Yeah. To end the show, there's a concept that we'd like to leave you with today, and it's the idea of giving back versus giving. We save this for the very end because you hear people constantly talking about, and it doesn't matter what aisle they're on or what side of the aisle they're on politically, people talk about giving back. You've got to give back. Well, a company, and probably one of the most generous companies that people think of today, is Tom's Shoes. If you're not familiar with them, Google them. They give away, like, for every pair of shoes you buy, they give away a pair of shoes to a child in a third world country. Really quite heartwarming company. The company culture seems pretty awesome. And one day I was listening to an interview with the founder, whose name is apparently actually not Tom, but he does answer to it, as it turns out. And he was talking about, somebody said something about, that's so great you're giving back to the community. And somebody you wouldn't necessarily expect to really say this said, I don't give back to the community, I give to the community, because giving back insinuates that I took something. And his point was, I never took anything from the community. Everything in some way, shape, or form was paid for and earned by me. And I turned around and I give to the community because I am a good entrepreneur and because I genuinely believe in what I'm doing and it's something I want to do. And I thought that was a really interesting and important distinction between giving and giving back. Because giving back really does insinuate that you took something from the system. And if you did in some way, shape, or form, let's say you got somebody was great to you and gave you free college tuition, and you turned around and repaid them in some way, that would be giving back. But if you started a business, to say that you're giving back to the community is kind of silly, because the community didn't give to you. You earned their business. You earned the right to be there. You earned everything you're doing. So when you turn around to give, you are just that. You're just giving. You're not giving back because you didn't take anything.
The mere fact that you opened a business in a community, by nature, gives to that community. You provide jobs, provide tax dollars. It's amazing how much goes into that community when a business starts there. That's why I said earlier that it's the backbone of liberty.
And with that, we wrap up episode 83. Thank you for joining us today. Help us bring you better information about preparedness. If you have an author, blogger, podcaster, video blogger, or any other person you'd like to hear on the show, we'd love to have them on. Contact the person you'd like to hear on the show and tell them about In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. Tell them to visit intherabbithole.com/guest. Don't wait. Do it today, and let's grow the show together. Do you have something to say about survival and preparedness? In the Rabbit Hole is looking for people that are passionate about all topics of survival to become blog contributors. Don't sit on the sidelines. Share your knowledge with others today. Contact us through the feedback form on the site and let us know you'd be interested in becoming an In the Rabbit Hole contributor. Are you part of the solution? Spread the word about preparedness by reviewing In the Rabbit Hole on iTunes. It doesn't just let us know how we're doing, it also tells others the show is worth listening to. Review us today on iTunes. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.